This video will show you how to use all the grading tools that I use in CLO to create graded PDF patterns. Though you might get a glimpse into exactly how grading is done, this video isn't a lesson in grading itself, but rather how to grade in CLO for those who already know how to grade a pattern. If you're completely new to grading and would like an intro into understanding it, with this video I'm releasing a free PDF grading guide that you can access at the link in the description when you sign up to my newsletter. It's an intro and overview of grading for those who are new to the concept. It explains size sets and grade rules and gives you a very basic intro into how grading is executed. Grading can be really complex and requires in-depth teaching. For now, I'm focused on teaching CLO to people who already create and grade their own patterns. So here we go. So before you start grading in CLO, you'll want to be sure of a few things. Firstly, that you've already fit your base size and are happy with it. If you haven't yet fit a physical sample, just know that you can adjust the pattern after grading in CLO, and all the sizes will adjust accordingly. Unless you make major design changes, the grading should stay intact. I often like to grade my patterns before physical sampling because then I can cut and sew multiple sizes at once. So if you're happy enough with the fit to proceed with grading, you'll also want to be sure that any symmetric patterns have symmetry applied in CLO. Grading in CLO works with pattern symmetry as well, so it'll just make your life a lot easier if you have that symmetry applied, so you don't have to grade both sides. Sometimes I'll even wait, let's say with a waistband that might have an extension on one side, I might keep it symmetric and grade it, and then remove the symmetry and add my extension. To apply symmetry to patterns that aren't symmetric in CLO, you can select all your patterns, and under Apply Linked Editing, you can select Symmetric Pattern with Sewing. You can do the same for patterns that are symmetric themselves and select Half Symmetric Pattern with Sewing. With sewing just means that if you edit the sewing or add sewing in CLO, it will do it to both sides. I always work with symmetric patterns with sewing. If CLO says that you can't apply symmetry, that means somewhere along the way your patterns differed. Even just the number of points or where the curve points are. If you know that they're supposed to be identical, then simply delete one side of your pattern and select the remaining side. Right-click and under Clone Pattern with Linked Editing, choose Symmetric Pattern with Sewing. Or it's Control or Command D on your keyboard. For half-symmetric patterns, you'll need to cut them in half, and with Edit Pattern, right-click on the center line, and from the drop-down, choose Unfold Symmetric Editing with Sewing. Lastly, before grading, if there are any markings you want to have on the final pattern, like balance lines, pocket markings, any details, you should add those to the base pattern and you'll want to grade them as well. Let's begin grading. First, you're going to go up to your Grading tab in the object browser and you're going to add a size run by clicking Add here. You can double-click to name the size group, which could be very helpful if you ever plan to combine files together. Sometimes I'll use a graded file as a reference for how to grade another style. So you might name the size group with the style name or number, or you might simply name it something like Female Alpha Tops. With the plus sign here, you're going to add as many sizes as you have in that size run. So in this example, I'm going to add enough sizes for extra small to double XL. I just count them as I go. This first one I'll call extra small, and then small, medium, large, extra large, double XL. And then I'll double click into each one and name it properly. I also highly recommend changing the colors of each size because the defaults are all quite close to each other, and it's really helpful when grading to be able to tell which size is the smallest versus the largest. Because sometimes you might get the direction wrong and it'll be super obvious if the colors are clear. One easy way to make sure it's clear is I do rainbow order, and then I can easily remember that my extra small is the beginning of the rainbow and my largest is the end. Just make sure the colors are really distinct from each other. You can select the first one and then hit Apply with the color you want, and then select each consecutive color and hit Apply each time until the last one where you can hit Apply and Close. I also recommend not going too dark with the colors because it can be really hard to see them in CLO. Now with your Transform Pattern tool, you'll select all of your patterns and assign them to the grade rule by clicking this down arrow. If you are someone who uses Bezier curves instead of curve points, this is like the curves you normally see in Illustrator that have handles. You're going to get a pop-up when you assign your patterns to a grade rule because CLO can only grade curve points, so it's just going to auto-convert your Bezier curves to curve points. This shouldn't be alarming or an issue, and when you export a PDF back out and bring it into Illustrator, it's going to go right back to Bezier curves. Now, this is a super important note to make. Before you begin grading, you'll want to check your base size. This means when you start applying the grade, the pattern that you start with will be established as the base size. So whatever size your existing pattern was, you'll want to check that box. Then after grading, you'll be able to check any size and the pattern will change. But if you forget to select the correct base size before grading, your grade rule will be completely off, as your original pattern will be established as the wrong size. As an example, I'm going to use this basic t-shirt. My sample size is a women's medium, and as I mentioned previously, my size run is extra small to double extra large. You'll need to have a grade rule or understanding of how the garment changes from one size to the next in order to grade it properly. This really just depends on how you establish your size run. You could choose to match a standard size chart like ASTM or any of the Alvenon size standards, or you can establish your own. This is a very basic example of my women's alpha size chart that I use for knit tops and outerwear. Alpha sizing usually has bigger jumps between sizes than numeric. My alpha sizing jumps 2 inches or 5 centimeters from extra small to extra large, and then 3 inches or 7.6 centimeters for all sizes above extra large. The main grading tool is Edit Grading, which can be found here. If you click and hold, you'll see all your grading tools drop down below. Starting with Edit Grading, there are 2 main ways to use this function. Think of your 2D window and all your patterns as existing on a grid of an X and Y axis. The way you grade is you tell CLO how much you want to move a point along those 2 axes. Moving up or to the right is going to be a positive number, and moving down or to the left is going to be a negative number. It can be confusing because the positive Y number might mean that your hem is getting shorter, whereas the negative Y number on an armhole is actually making it bigger. So you just have to remember it in terms of the XY graph. This is why the color coding really helps, because you can move it and then see what makes sense based on the sizes. So the first way to use the Edit Grading tool is using your arrow keys on your keyboard. The way you use your arrow keys is first by setting the increment that you want each keystroke to be. I'm in inches, but your arrow keys will be in whatever unit of measure you work with in CLO. So a good increment for working in inches might be 0.125 or 1/8 of an inch, or even 0.063, which is a 1/16 of an inch, if you're doing very small grades. You can tap the arrow key as many times as you want, but the reason you'd set the increment smaller than you need is then you can use it for different areas of the garment without having to change it every time. So let's say one spot grades a 1/2 inch, and one spot grades a 1/4 inch, and one 1/8 of an inch. If you set the arrow key to 1/8 of an inch, you can just tap it multiple times for however large the number needs to be, as long as it's a multiple of 1/8 of an inch. So for my underarm on my t-shirt, I want this to grade 2 inches in total circumference, and I'm going to divide that by 4 for each side seam on the front and back. So I want to move this point out a 1/2 inch per size. I'll tap my arrow key that is set to 1/8 of an inch 4 times to get to a 1/2 an inch. My armhole also drops a 1/4 inch per size, so I'll tap my arrow key down twice. For a lot of people, the arrow keys make more sense than having to figure out the negative or positive value on the XY graph. The second option for using the Edit Grading tool is to enter values into this chart called offset. I personally use this much more than my arrow keys because a lot of the time with grading, the values aren't perfect increments. And instead of resetting my arrow key values a ton of times or to random numbers, I just assume type them in here. So the way the offset boxes work is you can type in a number at the top where it says all, and it will apply to all sizes for that axis. Then if you have any sizes in your grade rule that are different, you can go in and manually alter those. So for my example, all of my chest circumferences are going to increase a 1/2 inch at the armhole for extra small to extra large, and then 3/4 of an inch for size XXL. So I will go into the chart and just change the XXL to 3/4 of an inch. The only way to alter an individual size like this using my arrow keys would be to drop down to the Edit Grading Each tool, and I can select just my XXL and move that another keystroke. But I probably would also have to reset the arrow key value because it's unlikely that XXL would be double the value of the others. So in the end, the arrow method can take longer than just typing into the offset chart. So as you can see, when you edit segment points, the curves should adjust in a smooth, gradual way based on the grading of the segment points. However, if you need to adjust the curves differently, you can drop down to the Edit Curve Grading tool and select the curve point and grade it just like you grade the segment points with Edit Grading, either using the arrow keys or the offset chart. And just like Edit Grading Each, you can edit a curve point of a single size with Edit Curve Grading Each. But for whatever reason, you have to do this by manually moving the point or with your arrow keys. This one doesn't give you the option to use the offset box. For anywhere that you have a marking that hits on top of a segment point, you need to be sure that you're grading both of these points. Sometimes it's simple enough to just marquee over both points with Edit Grading and enter in the values, but sometimes those points might grade differently, or for some reason you might not catch both points. So in order to grade these 2 points separately, the best way that I've found is I just move the internal marking out of the way. So I do that with my arrow keys so that I know exactly how to put it back. With my transform pattern tool, I'll select my internal line and I'll just hit my arrow key up 1 or 2 times. Then I'll select my segment point and grade that, as well as grading my internal line. And then once they've both been properly graded with transform pattern, I'll tap my arrow key back down and put the internal line back where it goes. If you forget to grade your internal markings like balance lines, you'll find that they just won't continue to the edge of the pattern on the large sizes, and they'll run off the edge of the pattern on the small sizes. You can copy-paste grading from one point to the next simply by selecting the point with Edit Grading and hitting Ctrl or Command C on your keyboard, then selecting the new point and hitting Ctrl or Command V. However, I will say that this function has been quite buggy for a while in CLO. If you run into any issues like this where it grades the segment point properly, but it doesn't grade the curve points properly, you'll just want to manually enter the values in instead. And if you need to clear the grading to start over because of a weird issue like this, just right-click on the point and select Reset Grading Values. If it's a curve point, you'll need to grab the Edit Curve Grading tool, and you can marquee over multiple curve points and right-click on one and reset grading values. The other way to do this is select all of those points and put 0 into the offset chart under All. If you run into issues with curves grading weirdly, or sometimes a curve point on your base size will be too close to a segment point and the smallest size will get messed up, or even have a grading error like this, I've found the best way to fix this issue is to adjust the curve points on the base size. If your curves aren't smooth, you'll just want to reduce the number of curve points on the base size, so you can select your Edit Curve Point tool and just start deleting excess points. If you delete a point and it changes your curve, you can just Edit Undo with Ctrl or Command Z and remove a different point. If your curve point is too close to a segment point, see if you can move it away without altering the shape of your curve. You can hide show the grading in 2D under the vertical toggle menu. I find that it's nice to have this hidden when I'm working on other things, and that means that the grading only shows when I'm using the grading tools. One reminder here is to make sure you grade buttons and buttonholes, as well as the internal markings for things like belt loops or pockets. When it comes to armholes, I often like to grade the armhole without any segment points on my notches because it helps CLO get a nice curve automatically if I'm not 100% sure how that point needs to grade. And then I will just add my segment points to my notch afterwards. For example here, if I grade my armhole and I just grade these points the same as the underarm value, it's not going to be a smooth curve, and I'd be guessing at what value to put for these notches. So if I reset the grading and I go to my Edit Pattern tool, I'm going to right-click and convert these segment points to curve points. I might also want to clean up my curve so there aren't too many points or any that are too close to the segment points. Then I'll go and grade just my top and bottom segment points of my armhole. You'll see that the curve automatically grades smoothly, and if I select my Edit Curve Grading tool and select these curve points, you'll see the values are kind of random numbers because CLO has just determined what value will give it a smooth, gradual curve. Then I can simply grab my notch tool and right-click on those notches and add segment points to them, and it'll maintain that smooth grade. You'll just want to make sure that it doesn't add unnecessary curve points. And if it does, just delete them with your Edit Curve Point tool. Once you're happy and confident with your grading and you're ready to check something on another size, you'll want to assign your avatars to each size so that you can toggle through the sizes. In order to do this, you go to Pair Avatar at the top here, and you're just going to select the little person icon and choose Pair 3D Form. You will need to have all your different sized avatars saved out as AVT files. You can use avatars from other programs, but you'll need to bring them into CLO separately as OBJs or FBX files and do a file save as avatar to save it as an AVT. If you're using CLO default avatars and say the ASTM sizes from the library, you just need to open that avatar, double-click the size that you want, and then save that avatar out as its size name so that every single size you have a separate avatar saved. Once you've paired an avatar with every size, you can toggle through by clicking the checkbox beside each size and simulate the garment to get it placed properly. If your avatars are CLO default avatars, you can hit this redrape button in 3D and it will make your life a lot easier when it comes to simulating each size. However, if your avatars were created in another program, the redrape button won't work and you'll just have to fix the simulating yourself. It's usually not too challenging until you get to the larger sizes and the patterns may have kind of pushed into the body and you might need to pull the front and back out away or even rearrange a waistband or a neck trim using your arrangement points. Once you've simulated every size once, while in your file, they should stay pretty well simulated. However, when you close and reopen the file, it doesn't always save the draping and you might have to do this again. When you're toggling through and checking things, make sure any time you want to change something to your grade rule that you toggle back to your base size. This is super important because if you imagine you have properly fit your base size and you don't want to change that pattern, if you edit the grade rule from size extra small or double XL, let's say, that's going to affect the size of your base pattern. Honestly, I wish CLO made it so that the base size was the only size where you could edit the grade just to be safe, but unfortunately they don't. If you've been checking all your sizes on the respective avatars and toggling through, but you want to be able to see them all next to each other, you can go up to Production and Grading Review. This will let you see all sizes side by side. If you hover over the center line here, you can adjust the window, which will change how many sizes you see in each row. You could also go to the bottom right and select 3D, and it will hide the 2D window altogether, and you can select this arrow here and hide the object browser, and here to hide the property editor. If you're in an older version of CLO, the Y key will hide your library. If you right-click and drag in the 3D window, you can rotate the garment and they will all rotate together. However, your Shift key doesn't work here like it does in the typical 3D window to keep things straight, and neither do the view hotkeys like 1, 2, 4, 6, 8. I personally don't think Grade Review is the best place to look at all the garments side by side. At the end of this video, in the PDF export portion, I'll show you how you can add every size into one file and see them side by side. The only downside to that is you need to have a pretty powerful computer to do that, so if your computer's already struggling in CLO, Grade Review mode is going to be the best way for you to do this. When you're ready to exit this view, you can click the refresh arrow at the bottom right of the screen and it will put everything back where it starts by default and it'll actually automatically bump you out of grading review. Another huge part of checking your grading accuracy is making sure your measurements are correct and that everything is matching. For example, I often have trouble getting my necklines and collars to match up or sleeves and armholes to stay consistent. CLO doesn't have as robust a system as, say, Gerber or professional 2D CAD grading software, so you have to be a bit more manual in double checking that things match up. The POM tool is so great in doing this when grading in CLO because when you create a POM, it will show you the measurement across every size. So I'll select my POM tool here, and for my full neckline, I'm going to select each point on the pattern that starts and finishes the neckline. Then I'll select my Edit POM tool, and I'll turn this into a proper POM. I'll right-click on each segment and select Show Length. Then I'll right-click on that segment again and select Segment Type, and it will change to run along the curve. I'll need to do this for each segment, and you'll notice that it defaults to selecting the entire POM after each action. So I need to deselect everything by clicking in the background to make sure I'm just selecting the one segment at a time. Then in the object browser, you can just double-click and name the POM. If you hit the P key on your keyboard before creating the POM, the tool becomes more like free sewing and will travel along the curve to begin with. but currently you're unable to hold Shift and do this with multiple curves. So I find it more useful to select all the points of the segments I need, double-click to end, and then make each segment run along the curve. You'll notice sometimes the segment type option isn't there, and I find the reason for this is there are internal lines interfering with the POM tool. So if there's an internal marking touching any of the points you selected, you need to redo that POM and move the internal markings out of the way and do it again. Once you have it all set, you can put the internal markings back in place. This is a bit annoying, but something CLO is working on fixing. If you right-click and select Y distance type, it will give you the vertical distance, like for neck drop. And if you right-click and select X distance type, you can get the horizontal distance between 2 points, like for neck width. Oddly though, it seems CLO marks the opposite segment to what it should for these, so don't let that confuse you. It's actually the dotted line that is creating the measurement. One thing to note when you're creating POMs from multiple patterns is you want to make sure that you're not running over part of the pattern that shouldn't be counted. You can avoid this by where the patterns sit in the 2D window when you create the POM. Once you have your POM reading properly, you can go up to the POMs in the object browser, which is under this ruler icon. When you slide this out, you'll be able to see all the sizes. So if I'm trying to determine how my neck trim grades, I can see how my neckline changes between sizes and simply do the math. So I know that I want to grade my neck trim that same amount. Here is a major pro tip I want to call out. With sewing in CLO, just note that CLO will not recognize sewing or notches when grading unless it is attached to a segment point. So for example, if you sew your neckline all in one go and you have no segment points to mark the shoulder or center front and center back, then those things are not going to stay properly sewn in 3D on all sizes. If you want to export out your graded pattern from CLO as a PDF, I'm going to show you how I do it in CLO 2025. It's a bit of a workaround because you can't simply export the graded pattern and retain all the sizes, but this is a request that CLO is working on. Before I get into the PDF export itself, I'm going to show you how to bring in all of your sizes into one file, but it's worth noting again that if your computer isn't very powerful, this might not be something you want to deal with. You will need to be able to simulate all the garments in the 3D window, so if your computer already struggles a bit with CLO, then Grade Review Mode will be a better option for you. You'll still want to watch this first part of this section as it's how we get to the PDF export, but you can skip over the part where we add avatars in and arrange the garments. I'm in my graded CLO file. I'll show you my process and also another way you could do it. What I personally do, because I sell my CLO files by size, is I toggle to each size, starting with the base size, and with my edit grading tool, I'll marquee over all my patterns and right-click and choose Unassigned Size Group. This removes the grading from the pattern. Then I'll go to my grading tab, delete the grade rule, and if I have any POMs, I'll grab my Edit POM tool, hit Ctrl A to select all of them, and hit delete on my keyboard. Then I'll delete them out of the object browser as well. Then I'll go to File, Save As, and save this file as my size medium for this style. I'll repeat this process for every size, so reopen my graded file, toggle to size small, unassign the pattern, delete the grading, delete the POMs, and save as size small. This is just my process because I already need these files separated out by size. The other way you can do this is within your graded file. I suggest starting with your largest size, and you'll see why when we get to arranging the patterns. So I'm going to toggle to my XXL. Using Transform Pattern, you can marquee over the whole pattern and copy and paste it with Ctrl or Command C, Ctrl Command V. And with Edit Grading, I'll select it all and unassign the size group. That will leave this pattern as a XXL. Then in my Grading tab, I'll toggle to my extra large. Copy and paste the pattern, remove the grading. I'll do this for all my sizes down to extra small. The reason I start with the largest size is that I want the largest sized patterns to be on the bottom for when we nest them all together. I'll show you what I mean shortly. If your computer is too slow and you don't want to fit all the sizes side by side, you can jump ahead now to the timestamp for the PDF export. So once I have all my sizes copied out, I'll delete my graded pattern and the grading in the object browser because I don't want to overcomplicate the file by having all the paired avatars in here as well. If the avatar left in your file isn't the base size, you'll want to select it and hit delete on your keyboard. Then I'm going to go to my avatar folder and I'm going to right click and add my base size avatar to my workspace. I want the base size to be the first one added at 000 on my grid, so it's in the center of my 3D window. Then I'll add each consecutive size, and I use this translation box to tell CLO where to put the avatar. So you could just add them all side by side in a line, which would mean you'd only need to adjust the x-axis. A positive number will put it to the right of your base size and a negative number to the left. I like to put them in sort of a diagonal line, so I'll add my size large 1 foot to the right and 1 foot forward. Then my size extra large will go 2 feet over and 2 feet forward. Double XL 3 feet. And going down, my size small will go -1 foot to the left and -1 foot back. Extra small will be -2 and -2. You can of course arrange these however you want. The y-axis will put the avatars up in the air or under the ground, so you probably don't want to use that. Now if you're trying to arrange your garments properly, the easiest way is to select all the patterns at once per garment and use your gizmo in 3D to get it as close to being on the applicable avatar as possible. Once they're all on their avatars, you can simulate them all. Just remember this might be too much for your computer, and if you find out that it is, then you'll just want to stick to reviewing all the sizes in grading review. Ideally too, you're assessing the fit in high res, which takes even more computing power, so keep that in mind. Now for the PDF export. If you brought in your avatars to see everything side by side, you may want to save that file out as its own name before we start messing with the patterns. If you've jumped over the avatar part and your garments are all over the place in 3D, that's fine. We're only worried about the 2D window at this point when it comes to the PDF export. Now, if you're exporting this pattern for a PDF to print or sell for home sewists, you won't need all the patterns. You'll only need the one side of every symmetric pattern. So now we're going to delete the patterns we don't need. For those of you not interested in fitting everything side by side, just know for future reference, when you're doing all of the copying and pasting to get every size, you can actually delete half of your graded pattern before that stage. So I'm going to delete the patterns I don't need and just keep my whereas left. If you're someone who doesn't mind having patterns cut on fold, then you can right click with the edit pattern tool on that center line and choose cut, and you can delete half of your symmetric patterns as well. Once you've deleted all the patterns you don't need, we're going to select every size of just one pattern. So I'm going to start with my front body, and you can select them in 2D or 3D if one is easier than the other. Once all your fronts are selected, you can right click on one and choose Align Center. This will just get them all lying on top of each other. You'll do this with all of your patterns, one at a time, selecting each size for that pattern and aligning to center. Once your patterns are aligned to center, you're going to organize them all the way that you want them to look in Illustrator. You could definitely just export this mess however you want and do this in Illustrator if you want to, but I personally prefer to organize mine in CLO first. If for any reason your smallest size isn't on top, you can right-click on any pattern and select Order, Bring to Front, or Send to Back. You have a number of align options to align the patterns all to the left or the bottom. I like to arrange my patterns exactly how they look when they're graded, because then it becomes a helpful tool for my customers if they're learning how to grade and they can use it as a reference. Most of the time, I know where the anchor point is, like the center front neck on a top, but sometimes a sleeve, especially a two-piece sleeve, it might be a bit hard to arrange them properly, and it would definitely be hard to do it in Illustrator. So what I might do is add my graded file back into my workspace as a reference. I can delete the patterns I don't need, and I will right-click on my graded pattern and say Order, Send to Back. That way this is on the bottom layer in 2D. I'm going to recolor my graded pattern to be a bright color and my different sizes to be light, and I'm going to switch to the translucent view in 2D for more visibility. Then I'll lay my graded pattern under all my sizes. Then I'll toggle through each size, and when I place my PDF pattern onto that size, it'll snap to it when the graded pattern is set to that size. You can also change your 2D view to transparent if that helps you. Once I have them all placed where I want, then I'll select them all and say Order, Send to Back, and that will bring my graded pattern back to the front and I can move it out of the way. You can see this is why I told you to copy paste from the largest to the smallest size, so that when they're layered on top of each other, you can see them all. I also like this because they will come into Illustrator layered the same way, and it makes it easy to click on everything because the smallest size is on the top and doesn't get hidden by the bigger sizes. Once you're happy with the layout, you can delete the graded pattern if you brought it in as a reference. And before we export the PDF, you may want to save a working version of this as a CLO project file, in case you come across anything you're not happy with after exporting and you want to change it. Then you'll go to File, Export Adobe PDF. You'll name it and save it wherever you want. And then under all of these options, I let everything on the left side be the default settings. And on the right, I check on internal lines, baselines and notches, and pattern outlines. I personally like to write all my pattern info, grain lines, etc. in Illustrator because I use my company fonts and the layout options are just much more extensive. Make sure you scroll down on these lists because I also will check the seam allowance on if I have it, and if you don't want the sew line, you can uncheck the pattern outline. For those of you in home sewing, I know that's how most of you work, so you'll need to add your seam allowance before exporting and uncheck pattern outline here. Adding seam allowance is super easy to do, and I'll put a link in the description for a video where I've already shown how to do that with exporting PDFs. Lastly, you may also want to check on buttons and buttonholes if you've added any in CLO, especially if you don't have any other markings for them. So I'll open up my PDF export in Illustrator to show you how it looks. You're going to start by using your white arrow and marking over a corner of the artboard. Then if you hit delete on your keyboard, that will remove the overall clipping mask. Then I'll select inside one of my patterns because it puts a fill in all of the patterns. I'll go to select same fill color and I'll delete all of those. Then I open up my PDF templates and I grab my personal size key for whichever size set I'm working on. It's worth knowing that every pattern gets grouped with all of its notches and markings coming in from CLO, which is great for adding them into their respective layers. I personally like my notches to be different than my pattern markings, so I'm going to select one of my notches and go to select same appearance and change all of those at once. That means when I'm eyedropping each pattern to its size, I have to select each element with my white arrow instead of the whole thing with my black arrow, so that I don't change my notches too. After I do all of the eyedropping, then I add my pattern names, grain lines, annotations, etc. I'll create my size layers and add all of my sizes to each respective layer. You get the gist. If you guys want a more detailed tutorial on this process, just let me know, but the purpose of this video is to teach grading and exporting out a graded file from CLO. I'm assuming the audience here already has their own way of doing all of this. So that's all for now.